My name is Darel Burns. Birthday is November 5th. I was born in 1931. I lived on a farm just northeast of Sac City. Did regular farm work until I was 15 years old, and at that time we moved to a small town, Marathon, about 25 miles from here, and I finished high school there and found work around there until I started college in 1949, and I always seemed to run out of money before I get a year completed. I'd come home and work some more until I get some more money. And then in 1952, I was drafted into the Army. And then knowing I was going to be going to the service one place or another, in December of 1950, I tried to join the Navy and failed the physical. So I came back home, and a year later, in February of 1952, I was drafted into the Army. And after I completed my training, I was sent to an anti-aircraft battery outside of Seattle. We were defending the Boeing Air Plant, where they built the airplanes for the military and civilians. I was stationed outside of Seattle. Our home base there was, in the beginning, Fort Lewis, which is south of Tacoma. It's a large training base. And then after a while, our headquarters got transferred to Fort Lawton, which was on the north end of Seattle, which was the place where all of the people going overseas and coming home from overseas had to go through that post to be sent overseas or discharged when they got back from Korea. We had a number of anti-aircraft batteries stationed all the way around Seattle. We also had units that were over at Hanford, Washington, which is where they made plutonium for the atom bomb. And then we had other units stationed at Spokane around an Air Force base up there. All told, we probably had 10,000 men stationed around those three places. When I first got there, I was at the 420th AAA, which is anti-aircraft, that battalion, and I was in headquarters battery. And battalion level, you had headquarters battery, which is the administrative wing of the battery, and then we had 4 gun batteries. Each battery had 4 90-millimeter anti-aircraft guns. I was part of what was called S3, which was Operations and Intelligence, and we were the part that gave the gun batteries their instructions on where to fire. And we trained constantly. One of our main things that we trained on was that we had a search radar, plus each battery had a radar. Our search radar could go out 300 miles, and we would search to find planes that were flying towards the United States. And we tracked where these planes were going, and we had a large board that you've probably seen it in movies, where they would put a pin or a little marker on the board where the airplanes were at. And as they got closer to the United States, if we thought they were aggressor planes, ones that were going to try to bomb the United States, we would notify the Air Force, and they would send aircraft out to intercept these planes and determine whether they were friendly or aggressors. And we probably did one of these training exercises at least once a week. Part of my duties was to do surveying and drafting, and I also had to go out and check the radars for each of the batteries and for the battalion, the search radar, to make sure that their orientation was still correct. And to do that, I had a crew with me. And first I worked under someone, and then I was in charge of it. But we had to go find known landmarks that someone else had located previously. And from locating those, then we would run information back to where we were located, and that would give us a way to tell the guns whether they were pointing in the right direction. And twice a year we would go over to another post at Yakima, Washington, where we would take our guns over and we would fire them, and while we were doing that, then the unit I was with would tell them where to fire. I enjoyed what I did at that time. We probably had a different attitude than I would have today. We weren't always the happiest that we were drafted. It interrupted our plans and our life. But as I look back over that, those were some of the best days I ever had. You develop a friendship with the people that you work with that lasts the rest of your life. And I continued after, in recent years, I have part of the Honor Guard where we do the military funerals. And I just quit doing that about 2 months ago because of some health issues. But it's the same thing there. The people that you get to know in the military are friends that you have forever. In my unit, each battery was about 220 men. And for instance, headquarters battery, we did the, kept track everybody. We provided the trucks to pull the guns around. The line batteries each had 4 anti-aircraft guns, and the men, it took about 8 men per gun to conduct the firing. And of course, you know, soldiers have to eat, so you have cooks, and you have to have people that are keeping track of who's out there and who's on duty every day. So there's a lot of paperwork that goes along with being in the service. You get well acquainted with everyone because you sleep in a barracks with maybe each barracks that we had probably was 50 to 70 men sleeping in double bunks. The bunks were probably no further apart than you and I are. And everybody had different jobs, so you became acquainted with what jobs everyone had. Probably my closest friend was the supply sergeant, and he was the one that would take your bedding every week and furnish you with fresh sheets and pillowcase, and it was up to you to make your own bunk and everything. But you got lasting friendships. I was always interested in construction. I would like to see about building bridges and roads and things of that nature. My plan was to come back and go to college, but I got out in February, which would have been in the middle of the college year, and I didn't plan on going back until that fall when school started at Iowa State. So I had to have something to do to live with. And my dad was in the business of livestock and grain hauling, trucking in a small town. And I ended up buying a truck and doing the same thing. And then I met my future wife 2 or 3 months after I got moved to the little town of Lynn Grove. And she was getting ready to teach school at the town of Peterson, which is now part of Sioux Central. And we started going together that fall, and then we decided to get married, and we got married then the next year in 1955 in August. And after we got married, then we moved to a little town of Maxwell, which is about 25 miles southeast of Ames, and she taught there, and I drove back and forth to Iowa State, and I was enrolled in civil engineering program at Iowa State. And then after one school year, she decided that she wanted to get a job on campus, and we bought a great big trailer house to live in. It was 7 by 23 feet, so it was pretty small. And we lived in a place which was student housing at Iowa State called Pamel Court. And there were a lot of small house trailers on there similar to ours, plus the housing, Quonset huts and things like that that they had put in during World War II. And she became pregnant, and we had our first baby while we were living at Iowa State. And I graduated in May of 1958, and then I took my first job working for Hancock County at Garner, Iowa as an engineer, and then I stayed in engineering until I retired in 1994. Probably the most interesting thing I had, that once we got our permanent gun emplacements built and the guns located there, then they decided they wanted to do some live firing around the Seattle area to test the guns. And it was my responsibility to determine where we were going to fire. And we did it on a Sunday morning. And I had been told where I could have the guns fire, and so I had to set up where they were to be pointing and what elevation they were to fire. And they did shut down the ferry boats that were going across Puget Sound at that time. And we had about a 1 hour span that we could do the firing. And we fired 16 rounds out of 4 different guns. Each gun fired 4 rounds. And of course we were firing up in the air, and they were timed airbursts, and of course you would see a big black puff up in the sky when the shell exploded. And we literally drove the telephone company crazy because of all the people that called in to find out if we were being attacked. And of course they hadn't done very much publicity. You know, television wasn't very new at that time. So the communication that we had to let people know what we were doing was not real good. So it was an interesting time. I think the biggest lesson you learned was to follow orders and to get your work done correctly and to work with people. We had officers who would tell other officers, you give me a bunch of guys from Iowa and Nebraska and I'll get the job done. We were in that period of time when they were breaking up the black units and putting the white men and the black men together. During World War II, the black units operated as individual units. So when I was in there, 60% of the people I worked with were colored. And some of them were my best friends. Then I had a couple of other sergeants that I thought a lot of. One of them had been through the Bataan Death March at Corregidor in Bataan early in the World War II, and he was in a Japanese prison camp for most of the Second World War. And he showed me pictures that he had taken of him when he got out of that prison camp. And he probably weighed 90 pounds, and when I knew him, he probably weighed about 260 pounds. But he was a terrific guy. Well, Sergeant Perry was his name. I have a son who is 59 years old. He went to St. Mary's, and on his 17th birthday, he joined the military. And he was in the military for 40 years, and he just retired a year ago last September, and he retired as a master sergeant. It was the best thing that could have ever been done because he was a person who was kind of a problem child at St. Mary's. But once he got in the military and learned his duties and learned discipline and to work with people, he did a complete transition. And I think there are a lot of people, young people who need direction. The military provides that for them. Well, every soldier, that was one of the first things he bought was a 35 millimeter camera, and the PX sold them. The C3 was the popular one, and I think we paid $35 for those cameras, and he took film, of course. All right. This was the radar that we used for search, and it had a range of 300 miles. This was me in basic training, and I'm wearing a Class A uniform, winter uniform there. And this is a summer uniform, Class B, because I do not have a tie on.